to every and all beings watching this video. My name is EmpressJae, and I am your soul sister. So, this is so divinely aligned. Okay. I am not religious in any context, but I am still spiritual and divinely guided. And I had got a download before I went to sleep, Saturday night going into Sunday morning. And with it being Easter weekend, I had, been making small jokes. I was like, wow, Jesus must have really been that guy for people to still be talking about him 4,000 years later, And I was making like little remarks like that, not trying to be funny or petty or anything like that. I truly meant it. I was like, Jesus must have really been that guy. Like, we still celebrating, we still remembering, his impact. And, he has religions around, his stories and his disciples. And so when I was falling asleep, a lot of my spirituality revolves around internal reflection, and just listening to, spirit communicate, whether it's through, I'll just blanket statement, through using one of your clair gifts, whether it's clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and that's kind of where I base a lot of my, relationship with spirit and God is through my divine, counterparts. And as I was falling asleep, I just kept hearing the statement, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And it was like a download, like right when I was falling asleep. So as soon as I woke up, I was like trying to recall it again. I was just like, God, what was you trying to tell me as I was falling asleep? And I had recalled one of my studies when I was in college, and I was taking a religion course, and it had brought back the text. It's called Zealot, the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. And it's by a man named Aslan. I will quote it somewhere here. I read this book years ago. I read this book like probably 7-8 years ago. And the teachings of it came back to me. And I did take notes. So we will be referring to my notes as I talk. And it says, reimagine Jesus as a spiritual teacher, not as a spiritual teacher, but as a political revolutionary. See, a lot of people want to remember Jesus as, this figure of love and light, this compassionate person healing and, bringing people together. He left that resonance now, but back then, trust, Jesus was not somebody that people were very fond of in the Roman Empire and religious rites. I wrote, he was a radical Jewish figure who challenged the Roman Empire and religious rites of his time. This depiction contrasts the more peaceful divine image of Jesus commonly presented in his Christian teachings. And so when you think, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? A lot of us want to respond, oh, well, Jesus would be kind, and Jesus would be compassionate, and Jesus would be forgiving, But I like the concept of the term, what would Jesus do? In the fashion, thinking of him as a political revolutionary, more so than a spiritual teacher. I wrote, Jesus has the courage to speak his truth, challenge authority, but also remain grounded in his identity. The phrase, what would Jesus do, often prompts, compassion and peace. But with the new visual of him as a political revolutionary, it invites, thoughts of boldness, resistance, and transformative action. So I invite the feeling of Jesus not as a religious figure, but as a frequency a presence, a deeply human yet divinely inspired being. I'm going to say that one more time. I invite the feeling of Jesus as a deeply human yet divinely inspired being. He was radical. He was grounded. He was compassionate. He was fierce in his truth. He was humble in his power. He didn't chase approval. He walked in purpose, even when it meant being misunderstood, betrayed, or even crucified. So I want to talk a little bit about me now with this perspective. Because remember, this download did come to me. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? I have recently moved. To those who don't know, I have moved from my birth home to my second home. And since moving here, I knew that I came here with for a purpose, with so much intention, so much reason. I literally planned, prepared. I knew when I left years ago that I was coming back because I had planned for this. These were feelings that I had way back when, and I knew that there was a purpose for me here. I didn't come here for nothing. And so with me coming back home, I'm still deeply human, yet divinely guided and inspired. And so I'm here because I was called to be here, yet I still am human and I have these feelings of resistance. And so I had to put it in perspective. So let me go back to my notes. Since moving, I felt like I've been in my own personal tomb. Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days, and I felt like I've been in the tomb for the past 3 weeks. This discomfort I've been sitting in is the invitation to embody my own version of that Christ-like consciousness. Truth over ego, faith over fear, presence over performance. I can only imagine the miracles that God performed while Jesus was in that tomb for them 3 days. But I feel it because I know that God's been working on me these past 3 weeks while I've been in my own personal tomb. And so I think about Jesus's mindset. He had completely surrendered to the process. Complete surrender to the process. Even when it hurt, even when it didn't make sense. And I even was remembering back in my adolescence. I believe I was going to Unity of God's Manna at the time, and we were watching a movie. I can't remember where I was at. It was so long ago, but I just remember sitting with a whole bunch of other children, and they finally showed us the movie, Jesus of Nazareth, the live version. And I remember something stuck with me the most. Jesus was carrying his cross, and I remember, I think he was still in the courtyard. They were still torturing him in the courtyard, and his mother was just pleading and just pleading and just pleading to, her son's case. And his mother, and he told his mother, he had just brought peace upon her. It's okay, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is a part of the process. The level of awareness, the level of awareness, even the people that you care about, they always want to protect you, your surroundings. Everybody else's perspective of what's going on just does not seem right. It doesn't make sense. And so they try to intrude. They try to, assist. But the walk that you have with God is so personal. And this is why I love my spirituality, because I solely make it about me and my experience, just as Jesus did, in a sense, because I don't want to compare myself to Jesus. But it takes me to my next thought. Jesus had the power of presence. Through him, I learned that presence is love. It's acceptance. It's knowing that you are already enough. That's why people healed in his presence, because he saw them fully and they felt safe to return to themselves. If you think back to even before the crucifixion, anybody who came into his presence, the story of when she touched his robe and he was like, who touched me? She didn't even touch him. She touched his robe. Let's talk about it. But it was through her honesty where he saw her and he healed her with his words, with his presence. My soul craves that same depth, not only for myself, but to offer that to others. So what would Jesus do? That's the thing. What would Jesus do? And I have a few thoughts of what Jesus would do. And if you have some thoughts of what Jesus would do, drop them in the comments. I want everybody to comment who's watched this video to this point. Comment what you think Jesus would do. I think he would breathe. He would rest when weary. He would pray before acting. He would walk into the unknown with grace. He would surrender, not give up. He would love anyway, even when tired, even when betrayed. He would choose to heal instead of hate. He would sit in stillness until clarity came. He would sacrifice to ascend his spirit. I wrote this. Affirm to yourself, I am doing what Jesus would do. I am doing what Jesus would do. Let this be your resurrection weekend. Or I wrote this, whatever, it's Monday. But let this past weekend act as your own resurrection weekend. Shed the parts of you that no longer serve your becoming. Let your power of presence rise. Embody the evolution of the Christ consciousness in real time, in your own skin, in your own story. You got this, you really do. You've been in the tomb. You faced the crucifixions of ego, of comfort, of identity. You've endured the silence, the shadows, the stripping away. But you were never dead. That's the only difference. You were never dead. You were just hidden. You were in the darkness. You were becoming. Just waiting on the right vibration to rise again. When you're in the darkness, it feels like you're in this low vibrational space. But I feel like it's in the low vibrational dark spaces where the work really happens. And when you're able to raise your vibrations to rise again, lifting your frequency, so you can have the power of presence. I just purpose for confirmation. You will be able to rise and resurrect and share your story, share your truth. And this is the best part. So what happened to Jesus after he was resurrected? They don't talk about that enough in church. They talk about he died on the cross for our sins. They don't talk about the process. And they don't talk about what happened after he resurrected. So I did a little research. And Jesus walked among his people again. He was wounded, but he had enough strength to walk and finish his mission. I wrote, he reappeared not as who he was, but as who he had become. So after he spent those 3 days in that tomb with God, he was changed. And when he stepped out of the tomb, he presented himself as the transformation, a transfigured being. He was glowing. His frequency, his energy, I can only imagine, it was elevated. And he was still peaceful, still full of love. How could somebody go through a torture and crucifixion, die and come back to life, and still be peaceful and full of love? So many, I just think about, our life now. Like, so many people go through hard things, and it's like, F the world. I don't care for nobody or nothing. I'ma just do me. You want to isolate yourself. You have a negative outlook and perspective after your crucifixion. What would Jesus do? He would still be peaceful. He would still be full of love. But now he's fully embodied in the truth of who he was. He went to the people who needed him the most, his disciples, those who doubted, because you gotta let your haters know, and those who scattered, because seeing that crucifixion, seeing the one thing that you believe in the most be taken from you, I can only imagine how disheartening that was for his followers and his believers. But that resurrection, to see him again, that's why we still saying his name 4,000 years later. You feel me? He was able to bring clarity and closure. Cause I can only I can only imagine that had to be a time, honey. He gave final instructions on how to carry the mission forward. And then he ascended into a new vibration. Because energy never dies. It's only transmuted and transformed. He visited, he taught, he loved, and he ascended. Even after the crucifixion. So ask yourself, what do you want to accomplish before your next ascension? If you spent time in the dark, and this is your chance to resurrect, when you come out of your tomb, who will you visit? What would you say? What energy would you embody? And I often think too, I truly don't believe Jesus wanted to be worshipped. I truly don't believe Jesus really had the concept that it would be a religion to worship him as an individual 4,000 years later. I think he just wanted everybody to walk with God as he did. It's just my personal opinion. Don't crucify me now. If you did, hey, call me Jesus. But I just want the message to remind you that you are here to be activated. You are here to be awakened and awaken. You are here to remind your soul to walk among the people in the same form, but a higher vibration. Yes, yes, yes. This is my resurrection. And I spent time with God and I told him my fears. And he asked me, what would Jesus do? God asked me, what would Jesus do? So I'm here. After going through years of travels and learning stories and healing people and healing myself and speaking my truth and standing in my power and leaning on courage and finding peace in myself, I spent time in that tomb, and I am resurrected here to tell you my story now. I'm scared. This is me just doing what I was instructed to do. 2222 on the clock as I say it. And I wrote a prayer, so I'm going to close off with a prayer. A prayer for presence, surrender, and inner resurrection. Source of my being, divine creator, energy that flows through all things. I open myself to transformation. May I embody the essence of unconditional love, of grounded truth, and of peaceful presence. May I live as a reminder that light can move through anyone willing to surrender. I release the need to force, control, or convince. Instead, I choose alignment. I choose authenticity. I choose the power of simply being. Help me let go of what no longer reflects who I'm becoming. Help me trust the stillness, trust the silence, trust the space between what was and what is yet to be. I now rise from the parts of myself that I've outgrown. I rise from the grief. I rise from the doubt. I rise from the stories that kept me small. I return to my truth. I return to my light. Let my presence speak louder than my words. Let my energy heal before my hands ever reach. Let my life flow in service to something greater, without the need for titles or recognition. This is my resurrection. A quiet awakening. A powerful return. I honor the journey. I honor the becoming. I honor the divine timing of it all. And so I rise with courage, with trust, with God. I love you.